get by. It resides between my eyes. Walk through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I feel like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Wise here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. Today is no different. I have Chris Yates. You can check him out, rhn.com. He acquired a 3-letter domain. I don't know if he'll reveal how much he paid for it. It was probably expensive. And his company is Rhodium Network. And Chris, before I formally introduce you, I always like to point out other episodes of the podcast people should check out. Since this is fitting, you have a lot of experience, decades of M&A acquisition experience from both ends of the spectrum. And so a good episode is John Warlow, who wrote Built to Sell. That was a really good one. Ryan Tansom, Intentional Growth Principles. He talks about the secrets to repairing a broken system. I know you know Ryan well. Joe Valley and Mark Doust, who run Quiet Light, have a top online, business brokerage, who you know very well too. And Joe talked about the Exitpreneur's Playbook, how to sell your online business. That was an interesting episode. And it was really interesting. Chris and I, we've known each other for a while, and we even bumped each other when you were having an event in Vegas one time. I was reminded of this. I had Peter Pilarchio of Nav43 on. He gave one of the most glowing testimonials for any company I've ever heard on the podcast. I said, what is some things that have moved the needle for you in your business? And he mentioned there's this thing called the Rhodium Network. I'm like, yeah, I know what the Rhodium Network is, and Chris, but he raved about it. And so Sujin Patel is also on. That was a good episode about growing Mailshake through acquisitions. I know he's spoken at your event. So check out those episodes, many more, on InspiredInsider.com. And this episode is brought to you by Rise 25. Rise 25, we help businesses give to and connect to their dream relationships and partnerships. And how do we do that? We do that by helping you run your podcast. We're an easy button for a company to launch and run a podcast. We do the strategy, the accountability, and the full execution. So Chris, we kind of call ourselves the magic elves that run around. They make it look easy for the host so they can create amazing relationships, amazing content, and most importantly, run their business. And for me, the number one thing in my life is relationships. I know you run a community, so it is for you as well. And I'm always looking at ways to give to my best relationships. And I've found no better way over the past decade to profile the people and companies I most admire and really share with the world what they're working on. So if you've thought about podcasting, you should. If you have questions, you can go to rise25.com or email us at support@rise25.com. I'm excited to introduce Chris Yates. He's the founder of Rhodium Network, which includes a community and events for digital entrepreneurs. The Rhodium Network has resulted in lots of wins for its members, including hundreds of millions of dollars in deals, business partnerships, friendships, and I think, Chris, even a marriage as a result of people being engaged in the community. Chris is actually living proof of the success of Rhodium because, Chris, I know you acquired a business. I mean, you've acquired many businesses, but one of these businesses from a member of the community, growing it to 7 figures a year in profit with the help of a partner that you found from the community, and then exited to a third member who was part of the community. So it kind of comes full circle. But Chris, thanks for joining me.
My pleasure. Yeah, I think they call that dog fooding. I've been able to do that within the community. So
exactly. But let's start off with just talk about Rhodium Network and what you do. And as we do that, there is a video version. So if you're listening to the audio, there's a video version, and we're going to poke around Chris's website. So tell people a little bit about Rhodium Network and what you do, and maybe we'll go through some of the evolution.
Sounds great. Yeah, I mean, from a high level, I got to the point where I had built up this portfolio of these online businesses and realized, man, it's kind of isolating and lonely doing what I do for a living. I live in Montana, so it's hard to find people who can speak the same language. And so way back in 2012, over a decade ago, I put together a small gathering of people in Vegas to get together and kind of share what's been working for me in terms of these acquisitions and stuff like that. And then it's really just grown organically through word of mouth. I've listened to the community, and today what it's made up of is 4 main, I guess you call it like typically owner-operated profitable digital businesses. Business models are typically going to be e-commerce, media, services, and SaaS. And revenues could be anywhere from like high six to mid nine figures, with our typical member in that like low to mid seven figure range. And one thing that I think makes Rhodium special is just that I work really hard to create a culture of giving within the community and people being willing to pay it forward and share experiences and things like that. So when you get really smart, kind of curated people, I should mention I also meet everybody before inviting them in. But when you get smart, curated community of people together with a culture where people want to help one another, kind of magic just tends to happen, which are some of those outcomes that you mentioned would be examples of that.
Talk about the first event that you did. And it's funny because I was watching you presented at, I don't know if it was an Idea Mensch event specifically. It was like 10 years ago. And you were talking about, at that point, still acquiring a bunch of businesses. So talk about your first event, the first iteration of Rhodium.
Yeah. So the first iteration, at the time, I had a business partner who had some experience with events, and I was much more of the guy behind the scenes. If you would have said to me, that like at the time, hey, Chris, you'll be running this community of 1,000, really successful and smart entrepreneurs, I would have totally said you were crazy. But yeah, so the first one was sort of let's get people together who are interested in this stuff that we're doing. As a byproduct that we're going to meet some cool people, learn some cool stuff, and maybe get access to some deals. At the time, we actually had a training program. And the funny thing is we bought that training program that teaches people how to buy businesses. So we bought the business that teaches people how to buy businesses. So with that
Very
came
meta.
a list. And so sometimes people are like, hey, how'd you get that first group of people to there? Well, we bought a list essentially as part of this brand that we acquired, and we leveraged that to get the first group of people. So yeah, we my business partner's wife had experience with the catering department at the Wynn, so we were able to get a hotel, or kind of convince them to give us a conference room there at the Wynn in Vegas. And God, I think maybe it was like 20 to 30 people who showed up, and I remember just like people were kind of like, man, this is awesome. Like, we have really just a small, intimate community here of like 20 or 30 people who are really experienced with these digital businesses. And like light bulb kind of went on a little bit, like, oh, wow, maybe I don't have to teach. Maybe just the fact that I get good people together is enough.
How did you decide to charge for that first event?
Well, I mean, it was like, I'll tell you generally in the event space, the first event's going to suck. You're probably going to maybe break even if you're lucky. The second event's still going to kind of suck, but it's maybe a little bit better. And if by the third event, it doesn't get more, you don't see it actually getting easier, something's wrong. So the first event's always going to suck. I've learned that over the years. And that's, certainly the case. Like it did go well just in terms of like content and stuff, but from an ROI perspective, it was tough. We hired like a video guy, and we had like a food and beverage minimum with this conference room and all this kind of stuff. And so
I've been there.
We kind of had this nut we had to sell enough tickets to. So we figured price wise, okay, well, if we can get X number of people at this price, it makes sense. We didn't want to charge so little that it actually would devalue the event and make people think, oh, this is just a pitch fest or something like that. So I want to say that first event was around, maybe somewhere around $1,000 mark for like a 2 or 3 day event, if I remember correctly. It's been a while.
Well, it's interesting though. I'm just curious because you did have a back end to overall, because your business was training people on this. So it wasn't like you went out to start an events business per se, because your business was teaching this. So it was kind of an extension of what you did.
And our core business was actually doing it. Like, we were out there buying these online businesses and operating them ourselves. So yeah, I mean, it's almost like the deal you mentioned. You have your core business, which is operating these businesses, and then as a byproduct of having a community around you, you may get more of those deals or opportunities for those deals that will come up. And then potentially, you might be able to provide services or coaching or training or some of those kinds of things if in a worst case kind of scenario. So yeah, we had a little bit of a funnel. We hadn't really quite figured it out, but
What's interesting is you've used acquisitions to shortcut time and money, right? So going back to when you were working for a company and you ended up partnering, I think, with your boss at the
Mhm.
time. Talk about that transition point to you're working for a company and now you decide to go off and start a separate company.
Yeah. So this is actually for people who want to become entrepreneurs but sort of have the golden handcuffs of their current job. I don't know if this is a common path. I've heard it a few times over the years, but I think it is a story that would be potentially relevant for many people. So essentially, what happened was I was working, getting really good results, and the owner of that business, I guess I see it as more of a mentorship relationship where he saw a lot of potential in me, and at the same time, like I was really benefiting his business, and we had these digital marketing things we were doing to grow his business, and so at some point he's like, hey, we should be doing this for our clients, and he knew I was interested in entrepreneurship because I had done some smaller businesses through college and had kind of gone down that path a little bit. And so I can't remember exactly how it went down, but we decided that, hey, we're going to partner together and sort of take our marketing department that is in-house currently, turn it into an agency. The main company will be your first main client to make sure that, really you have no risk at this point. And then you will also get equity in this new marketing company. Now we can service the clients of the main business. So what an easy way to step into entrepreneurship in a very low cost way. And having a first big client and a steady lead flow of new clients. I mean, you can't ask for much more than that if you're starting an agency.
So you go from job, marketing company. What was next?
What was next is continuing with that. Somewhere along the way, I met who would become my wife, and that pulled me away from where I was living at the time so that we could end up moving and starting a life together, essentially. So as a result of that, I worked remotely and continued to run this agency and help these small businesses and things like that. And eventually it made sense for me to buy my old business partner out of that company. So this became my full, I guess, business, 100% ownership, and continue to run that with a really great relationship with the original boss slash mentor that I mentioned.
So how did you structure that buyout? That's like your first kind of, it's not really an acquisition, but it's an M&A deal.
I hate to say it, but I don't even remember the specifics. We kind of valued the business, and I ended up paying him. I think he was able to do it like by paying him out over time or something like that. To be honest, I don't even remember. It's been so long. Sorry.
Well, I mean, that helps. I mean, you had a certain percentage each of you owned, you valued the business, and then you were able to, since you were working in the business, were able to pay him off over time, didn't have to kind
Yeah.
of give him a lump sum.
Yeah,
But
and he
then,
was
you know,
super, as any mentor would be, like he was super, I guess, generous with the process and understanding and all of that kind of stuff. And so if you're in partnership with a good human, these types of situations aren't that difficult. It's when you have conflicting interests where those types of things become much more challenging, I've seen.
so when did you step into really putting acquisitions on hyperdrive, where you started to really use that as the path and vehicle to, increase the portfolio?
Yeah. So one of the limitations with a agency like I was running is that your ability to generate income is tied to labor, essentially. So you either need to hire people or you need to work more. I was doing both, and I found that I wasn't totally enjoying client headaches, with managing expectations of these smaller, price sensitive customers, employee headaches, etc. And I always felt like, man, I'm using my knowledge to build everybody else's businesses. Why don't I have assets that I can utilize this? So that was in the back of my head. And funny enough, the original boss mentor I mentioned sold that original company that I was part of and decided, hey, I want to see what Chris is up to these days. And so we ended up kind of putting our heads together and coming up with the idea to, hey, why don't we go start buying some digital businesses and we'll do something together on that. So sort of came back to that one relationship again.
So what was the first milestone for you in as far as purchases go?
Yeah, so what we did on that first deal, as far as what I can remember, was we found somebody who was already in the space doing this successfully, had a bit of a track record, and we were starting to, buy up some of these like brands, the training thing that I mentioned, and things like that on our own, getting a little bit of experience just on small deals and stuff. But our first like more substantial deal was finding somebody who actually knew what they were doing, at least we thought, and partnering with them essentially. So they brought the deal to the table, we brought money, and did the deal with them. The idea being that we would buy this business, and they had a path for growth, and then the idea was to turn around and flip it relatively quickly. So that was one of the ways we bridged the gap from very little knowledge to, hey, let's leverage other people's experience.
And then what was the first deal you were nervous about? It sounds like the initial deals were smaller and you were just getting, your feet wet and kind of going through the process a few times, but then you scaled up to more six-figure deals as opposed to smaller deals.
Yeah, I would say our first six-figure deal was probably one where I was nervous about that, because at the time we saw a lot of potential in what we were doing, getting really good returns doing it. And so we had a potential investor who wanted to be part of it and, gave us a really attractive valuation, came with a check. So it was something where in order to really make this something that could be much bigger, we had to start going bigger, right? And so we had some expectations of an investor, and we're doing this larger deal. And I didn't really realize how risky that first deal. Looking back on it now, I know if I were to do it again, would definitely not have done that as our first sort of six-figure deal. But yeah, that was one that definitely made me nervous because there were more expectations involved.
Why wouldn't you have done that one, looking back?
It was all built around SEO, search engine optimization. And for those who've been around the game for a while, it was just before Penguin, one of those algorithm updates that were pretty substantial. And we didn't really know much about due diligence on backlink building and some of the things that you would do, knowing what I know now on a deal like that. And had I looked closer at that deal, I would have realized this is not something that is super sustainable as it stands now. And it ended up getting hit and dropping by, I want to say like traffic dropped by like 70%, revenue dropped like 60% overnight, essentially, because the whole business model was go get free traffic from Google and then monetize it. And there was no real true business behind that where you had a relationship with the customer. It was all about new traffic to the website.
So what was, if you look back, I know you've done a lot of deals over time, maybe a learning or a mistake that you're like, okay, I'm not going to do that again. I'll bring that into the next. I mean, from that one, you're like, okay, we need to really evaluate the factors involved. And I know you had a whole business around that. What was another maybe learning that you took into a future deal?
Another learning that I took into a future deal, specific to that deal or just in general?
In general.
Yeah. I mean, I guess like a big thing for me is that there's two things. One is you want to buy deals where your downside's relatively limited and your upside is unlimited. So in other words, like try not to buy a business where, it's at its peak. So this one had really strong rankings already. So it was kind of like at the peak, right? And so the only way it could have gone, at least in the short term, was down. And so we didn't leave ourselves a lot of room for some of that upside potential. So that's one big one. And another one would be to actually don't treat these things as like an asset that just, is like a hack that makes money. Treat it more like, hey, I'm actually buying a real business. I want a relationship with my customers. I want my hands on the levers of the outcomes of my business. So in this case, Google had the biggest lever, right? And while we can maybe influence that, at the end of the day, Google can flip that lever and screw us, right? Whereas what I ended up doing with that business was totally changing the model to being built around paid traffic and building like an actual email list and all those kinds of things. So I learned a lot about finding better ways to monetize the same traffic that exists, and remembering that, there are ways to monetize a business that don't just require you to throw ads up on a website. Like, you can actually have a business that fits your lifestyle, which for me was really important. And in this case, I was able to build a true relationship with customers, have advertising that I could measure my customer acquisition costs down to the keyword level or ad level, et cetera. And my hands were now on the levers of my business and the outcomes, not kind of building on rented land, as the saying is.
When you were acquiring businesses, I know it probably changed, but what were the criteria that you were looking at to see, okay, this would be something we would even consider and then something we'll move forward with?
Yeah, there were a few things. So one is, well, we can get into like the due diligence side of things, but if we talk about, we had these things. So we had this like checklist we built, and we called them X factors. X factors were like, hey, X means this is a deal killer. Like, we're not even going to go pursue this deal. Some of the things on the X factor list were, is this a trendy or heavily seasonal market that we're going into? So we wanted things that were, kind of evergreen, meaning that they're around now and they're going to be around in 10 years, So that would be like an example of one of the X factors. Another one would be, we would look at the valuation of the business. So sometimes you can get an asking price. We did do a lot of off-market deal sourcing where we would just contact people to see if they want to sell. But at the end of the day, like, if their expectations on valuation doesn't fit the model of what we need our returns to be and to leave us some upside potential, then we wouldn't even pursue that one. So those were two off the top of my head.
I feel like there should be a book, Chris, called
Right.
X Factors. Were there any other deal killers that you remember? So there's obviously it's trendy, seasonal, it's not evergreen. The valuation expectation is just way out of whack, so you can't, get your return. I remember talking to someone and they wanted, it wasn't a SaaS company, by the way. They wanted 33 times or something, 38 times. I'm like, that's more than Google. Like,
Times annual?
Yeah.
Wow.
No, yeah, exactly. Times annual. And I'm like, that's more than Google, I think. So that's kind of crazy. But so that's way out of whack. Any other deal killers for you that stick out that people should look out for when they're kind of vetting these deals?
Yeah, other deal killers. So gosh, I just had one and then I lost it for a second. So give me a minute to think. Can we edit this out?
Yeah, no, I mean, whatever. We could keep talking and you'll think about it.
Yeah.
Because I know that, was it a type of company that you were looking for? Because I know, was it SaaS or e-commerce or content? What was the criteria from that end, right? Because I know when I was talking to Sujin and he's spoken at your conferences, he's looking for specific SaaS companies in a certain range, right? And so I imagine you may have been looking at certain types of companies as well.
Yeah, thank you. You just sparked my memory there. So one of the big things for us was, what does it require to run this business? Is the current owner like some kind of technical expert that if we try to run it, it would be impossible for us to really understand that, or hire somebody to do it, or some of those kinds of things. And one of my goals at the time was to, I've been reading the Tim Ferriss books and wanted, to achieve the 4-hour work week where I had location and time independence and all those kinds of things. So I was shying more away from really labor heavy businesses, just because I had also come out of an agency previously. And, and then I also didn't really love the idea of dealing with, for instance, inventory, because there's a lot of people that do, but it is a cash eating machine, especially if you're growing these businesses. So we weren't really doing too much on any kind of heavily inventory businesses. So, it'd be more like digital products, info products, little bit of light SaaS businesses, those kinds of things, software businesses. They would be more conducive to sort of those lifestyle and our ability to sort of understand and operate them. And then, how much time is the owner using in the business? So you can't get to the 4-hour work week if you immediately step into a business and have to work 80 hours a week to even keep it where it's going, right? So those were also really important for us to take a look at.
Another, Chris, I see, and you could disagree with me. Transition point is where you were buying up businesses, you had a portfolio, and then you um, bought Centurica, and it seemed like you focused then more time and energy as opposed to growing the portfolio just on that one business. So I'm wondering your thought process there.
Yeah, I mean, I can give you the full story. It's a little bit emotional. Do you want to go there?
Let's do it.
Okay. So I was running Rhodium and operating the portfolio of businesses, right? We got to the point with that portfolio where I felt like I was just kind of turning the wheel. Like we weren't doing a lot of new acquisitions. It was really just operating something that was already happening. Around about that time, my mom passed. And so like it was like all these things and it kind of came together and I was just like really unhappy with, doing the work that I was doing. And so sort of lost the passion a little bit for it. And I realized about myself that like, man, I love starting and creating and having new things coming, right? And so started to learn more and more about myself and was also struggling with, as I mentioned earlier on, man, it's like I wanted to be this guy behind the scenes, and now I'm sort of involved in this community, and like I'm more and more needing to have my face be part of it. So I'm struggling with really taking on the identity of somebody who can do that. And so I went through some like personal coaching programs and stuff like that, and was able to get through that, and really came to the realization that, man, Rhodium is actually really well set up for my wiring because I get to start essentially a new business every year by doing an event. I get to talk to interesting new people all the time. Like I'm making an impact. I care about the work I'm doing. And, so I started, selling off some of that portfolio and winding some of those deals down and really starting to double down more and more on Rhodium. And then had a member of Rhodium who was the original founder of Centurica, which is this company that you're mentioning, does due diligence for acquisition. So obviously I had this community that was known for M&A and all this kind of stuff. And he had a service business that was obviously very, to use the lame term of synergistic to that community. And he said, I want to go do something else. I want to build a SaaS business that can become $1 billion company. And there's two people in the world that I would sell Centurica to, Chris, and you're one of them. You want to do a deal. And it was kind of a no-brainer deal for me. So I ended up doing that deal. And that was really where the two businesses actually aligned really, really well, because the better I did with Rhodium, the more word of mouth I got for Centurica, potentially more clients, referrals, all those kinds of things. And the fact that I was I was becoming more and more known in the industry. People had trust that Centurica would do a good job, which I believe it did. But that credibility of that agency also was really strong with me at the head of that company. So those two businesses really supported one another really well. So I felt like I could kind of dial into this business that I love, plus have something with a lot more upside potential with the agency.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I don't oversimplify it, but it does seem to match perfectly because you have this community of digital entrepreneurs, in SaaS, e-commerce, et cetera. And then you have this due diligence tool that helps people evaluate deals.
Yes.
And so talk about Centurica for a second and growing Centurica and some of the things you did to grow Centurica. Obviously, you have a community which naturally grows it. I don't remember if Centurica, because there was also a product, Market Watch, that was under Centurica. I don't know if that was there or that's something that stemmed out of your when you took it over, the idea there. But that seemed to be a very cool kind of product within Centurica as well.
Yeah, so Centurica, the core of the business when I bought it was helping people who were buying, let's say, a $50,000 website or something like that, right? And they're paying. It was intended when I bought it to be like this productized thing where, almost like a Carfax, where you click a couple buttons and you get this report on the risks of a business, right? Over time, I realized that actually was devaluing really what people wanted. So what happened was, we started with deals of that size. And as the industry evolved, I evolved, Centurica got more well-known. We started getting more and more people who were coming into this space with doing larger deals, 7-figure and up deals. And when they saw a price point of like $500, we're like, man, this can't be good. Like this can't be thorough. It can't be complete. So what I realized, like around that time, lending became much more prevalent in the digital acquisition space. And so we had a lot of these people kind of coming out of corporate or coming out of other businesses who were taking on these SBA loans at very low rates to buy businesses and these digital businesses. And there started to become more and more banks who were willing to do it. So that trend started, and these were the people who were giving me this feedback, like $500 is way too cheap, and people in the community were giving me the same feedback. And so at some point, I'm just like, screw it, I'm going to throw everything but the kitchen sink into this, and I'm going to 10x the price and have a second option for people. When I did that, the business over about a period of 5 months grew by 500%. So just packaging a premium offering, worst case, all that will happen is more people will buy your lower priced one because it seems cheaper. Best case is, in what happened in our case, is everybody will start buying it. Then you got to figure out how to make it to be scalable, which was the other challenge that eventually became an issue for me. So, and then in terms of Market Watch, you mentioned, yeah, that was started. The seeds of it were already there. And one thing about the business of Centurica, it's very time dependent when you can actually sell that customer. So they have to be like at the point where maybe they got an accepted offer on a deal, or they're very close to having that happen before they even really need to talk to Centurica. So we needed a way to stay connected to those people consistently. So we created this tool which aggregated all the broker listings in one place and let people set up email alerts and stuff. So every day in their inbox, they're seeing Centurica. So when it comes time for due diligence, who do you think they're going to think of, right?
Genius. I think it's genius. Like if you go to Centurica now, there is a Market Watch, and you could literally just subscribe, and you pulled in not only that, but I think you could correct me if I'm wrong, but like partnerships come with some of those companies that are getting pulled in. I mean, we're talking about Quiet Light, and you work with Quiet Light throughout the years as well. They're in the community. Once you pull them, you're aggregating all those in there too.
Yeah. And I mean, so I do have to say, when I owned the business, there was no financial arrangement for companies to be in that Market Watch, like companies like Quiet Light and others who we aggregated. It was really just like we tried to put the better brokers who actually had decent deals in there, and that had a good relationship with Centurica. Because, if you imagine like, if you're selling a house and somebody hires a property inspector who has a reputation of being, overly aggressive or something like that, you may not want that property inspector. So that happened a few times over the years with certain brokerages. And but with great brokerages like Quiet Light, they would actually send people to us because they would have they represent the seller. They would have buyers who were looking for due diligence. So they would send business to us. And obviously, if they're in the Market Watch and we were attracting buyers who would end up going to them, it was a good kind of win-win sort of scenario. And yeah, like that, I think so. But yeah, great points there.
I know you ended up selling Centurica, and we won't go through all the details. You did a really good interview, and I encourage people to check it out, with Ryan Tansom, and where you went deep and vulnerable, even on one that didn't work actually, and all the things that happened there. So we don't have to rehash it. And then finally one that did work. And so I encourage people to check that out, of just some of the red flags you saw. I still kind of shiver when you say the word clawback in that interview. Like you got paid the money and then they could actually take it back, even after they've paid it, retrading, like all those things you talk through. It's really, really interesting. But one thing that stuck out that I want to talk about is due diligence around clients, because what are your recommendations of best practices? Because I know there'll come to a point where they may want to talk to certain clients. And so if a company's listening, whether they're buying or they're selling, what are some of the recommendations of best practices when it does come to that point on wanting to do due diligence around for the clients, and even maybe wanting to talk to them?
Yeah. So first thing I will say, if we kind of zoom out, the process of due diligence, it kind of starts once you have, it does start once you have an accepted offer, and it doesn't really end until the deal is done, right? So many cases, that's a multiple month process. And it can be extended longer than that if there's weird financing involved or things like that. So the benefit to that is that you have time to sequence things based on sensitivity. So you can start with the least sensitive stuff first in terms of your client data and go to the most sensitive stuff closer to closing. The important thing is that both the buyer and seller are setting expectations early in the process that, hey, this is something I'm going to ask for at some point. What do you want to see? And this is the buyer saying this. What do you want to make sure before you're comfortable sharing this? What needs to happen before we can do that kind of thing? Like, okay, well, I need, money in escrow before I can really have you talking to my clients, as an example, or something like that, right? So basically think about it like that, as this gradation scale of like, start with least sensitive, maybe non-specific data, and then work your way to the point where somebody might be having a conversation with your top client, right? So an example of a best practice thing to do, let's say from the buy side, I would ask for an order export by client with no personally identifying information. So it would have the date of the order, maybe the item purchased, the dollar amount of that order, whether or not it was refunded or any of those kinds of things. So now you have got this order export and you've got the unique client ID. So you can see how many times did this client order, how often are they ordering, are there certain clients that are in that 80-20, meaning that like there's this one key client that makes up 80% of revenue. That's we call that customer concentration. You can take that spreadsheet and then just really drill into the details of what's happening with their clients. And the seller can be comfortable with that because you're not revealing any personally identifying information about your clients. So that would be like a first step as a best practice, in my opinion.
So talk about then when you get to more sensitive. I know one of the things I believe you did at the time was you put it in non-compete and non-solicit in there. So go ahead.
I will speak to this. So some of this is getting into the legal areas, and we just have to be careful that neither Jeremy or I are attorneys. We're just speaking from our own experience. Definitely one of the big things you will need if you're, especially with an agency business, is you'll need a good attorney on both sides. But typically when you enter a letter of intent, which is essentially, hey, I'm intending, as a buyer, I'm intending to buy your business. And as a seller, like I'm intending to work with you to have this deal happen. You'll also have both parties sign, number one, a non-disclosure, meaning that if you're revealing information that's private about your business, then I'm not going to go publish it on the internet and some of those kinds of things. So definitely need that. That is typically going to be binding in that letter of intent. Again, talk to your attorney whether or not that's the wording says that. And then two is a non-solicit. What that means, if somewhere along the way, the buyer were to discover who one of your clients are, they can't just like cancel the deal and go, solicit them for business. And it's important too for employees. You don't want them going after your employees or contractors or some of those kinds of things. So yeah, that's definitely a best practice that you should get in place pretty quickly. That helps to some degree from a protection perspective, that your private information isn't going out there. And then this person isn't just sort of hunting for your client list and then going to go after them. Not to say that can't happen, but at least you have legal recourse if that were to happen.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. It was a great episode you guys did. So I want to encourage people to check it out. I want to talk on the Rhodium front, okay? Because I know there's a community and then there's events. So I want to talk about the events for a second. And you have them, at certain cadences. But there was two that stick out, past speakers, because you've had some amazing past speakers. One is Yuri Pap, and he talked about at one of the events how he went from working in 40 plus hours a week to 4 hours a week. And again, there's always a disclaimer. There's lots of situations there, but what were some of the takeaways that you remember when he shared speaking at Rhodium from that talk?
Yeah, well, it's funny because I'm kind of in this position where I'm trying to run the show. That's gotten better over the years. So I don't always get to sit at all the roundtables and things that happen. But I do tend to get the recordings afterward and try to listen to as many of them as I can. But I think what I remember, and the cool thing is I actually have like a, I don't know if you call it a personal, but at least a business relationship with all the people who are in the community. So I've been talking to Yuri over the years, and I've been able to follow his journey and see, kind of what he's done. But he's in the e-commerce space, and so he's got a business where he's been able to put some more people in place to help take off some of the load from him. So that was, I mean, it's hard for me to not get into the specifics of his business to really explain, some of the things, but a lot of it is I think what I think are relatively obvious things, like you just audit your time and you look for the things that you could hire somebody for $10 an hour for that you're probably doing yourself. Couple things like that, putting systems in place, documenting them, hiring an executive assistant. Those are a few of the common things that I'll hear people like Yuri talking about.
Do you remember a key role, and maybe it was an executive assistant for him, or maybe for another member, of what helped, like when we think of 80/20, greatly reduce the time? What was a key role or two that you remember someone talking about?
Yeah, so it changes over time. So very early stage, it might be something as simple as an offshore executive assistant who essentially they're going to help you just do the grind stuff that you have to do. Commonly, a bookkeeper would be an early hire. As we go a little bit further, then a chief of staff is commonly a role that people look for. Sometimes they actually will go right for more of a COO, or if you're familiar with the entrepreneur operating system, it might be an integrator. And then eventually, I've actually had people like, there's a guy named Paul in the community who he has somebody doing his laundry, mowing his lawn, really almost like a house manager type person. And then he has that same thing within his business with executive assistants. And he leaves every meeting saying, there can be no to-do lists on my plate at the end of this meeting. And so he literally has got himself pulled entirely out as the visionary of the business. In order to do that, he needed to find the right fit for that COO integrator, somebody whose job is to just be in the weeds and operating and pushing the team. What he gets to do is work on big ideas, big deals, and be the true visionary of the future of that business. So I've seen the entire spectrum and the different hires at different times and all that kind of stuff.
I want to talk about the community for a second, but thanks for sharing that, because it's a reminder. I do have that on my list, because I remember talking to another friend entrepreneur who has a house manager. I'm like, that seems very luxurious, but it doesn't have to be full time either. It could just be part time. And this person had a person come in the mornings to do their dishes, like from the previous day. I'm like, that sounds like heaven to me. And then doing meal prep.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe they were only there 2 hours a day or something like that. So it wasn't like a full-time staff. So thank you for that reminder. That may make my marriage better too, if I find someone for these things.
Yeah, and I've learned some lessons on the marriage side. My wife is amazing, but there it can be sometimes very difficult, especially for the female role, to let some of those things go off of their plate. As well-intentioned as you are and offering it, there's social constructs that have implications with when that type of thing happens. But there are like essentially Uber for laundry that you can do, where you just set your bag of laundry outside of the house and people will come pick it up, do it and do it the way you want it and bring it back and nice and folded and all that kind of stuff. So you can always start small, just testing something like that without going with a full hire.
I love it. Community. It started off, the first iteration of Rhodium was events, and talk about integrating the ongoing community into the Rhodium Network.
Yeah, I mean, the feedback I got after doing it was probably the second event where I really started getting this more, was like, hey, these people are awesome. How can we stay connected between events? And at the time, 2013-ish, Facebook groups were the easiest platform to be on for that. So I ended up using Facebook group to put people in there. And then I actually got to the point where I realized, man, if I can get people engaged, almost like, the parallel would be the Market Watch tool for Centurica. I will provide an amazing experience for people for a week in October, and then I never talk to them again until the next year, right? What if there was something to connect the dots between the events where people can engage, continue to help each other, things like that? And I didn't necessarily do this strategically, but when you combine people meeting offline with an online community, the online community is substantially more valuable. Instead of it being a bunch of strangers, you're actually in there feeling like, oh, that's Joe. I know Joe or whatever, and their willingness to answer with details and all that kind of stuff goes up pretty substantially. So I will say that I kind of fell into this idea that, blending the offline and the online world makes both of them better. And so that was a big, I guess, takeaway or lesson from my perspective.
So right now, talk about a little bit of how it works. So someone could join, can they join and it's a monthly membership for just the community and then the events are extra, or do they pay and it's all encompassing? How does the logistics work, I guess, right now of a Rhodium Network?
So how people engage, I have to add a little bit of context here. So, when I exited Centurica, plus other things that I've done over the years to build wealth, I'm at a point where I don't have to do Rhodium just for the money. It's not like it's awesome and it helps pay the bills, but if I'm not making a ton of money, it's not that big of a deal. And I'm not super interested in, a big major organization that scales to the moon and I have to hire a bunch of people. So I treat Rhodium much more like a craft, almost like an indie, if you're familiar with the term indie for indie films and stuff like that. I think of Rhodium more like an indie event and community, So I have to add that. And I'm not saying this is right for everybody in the decisions they make, but in terms of how I've done it is, number one is I interview everybody who's interested. I do a Zoom call, typically around 30 minutes first, assuming they're the right fit. And I look for people, both demographics are good, their business is at the right stage and size, but they're also good humans. The next thing that they'll typically do is they'll join the Facebook group. I don't charge for that. It's kind of like this central water cooler for the community and an easy place for me to help people really get a vibe for Rhodium and say, hey, are these my people or not? So there's very little risk for them. They have to invest some time in meeting me, but they do get to experience Rhodium. They get to help others. They hopefully will get to be helped and meet some people. Assuming they're feeling at home, they'll probably want to engage at the next level. So the in-person event would be the next one. I charge $2,000 for that, typically run a 3 or 4 day event, includes several meals. I do matchmaking and things like that as part of the meals. So it's actually a pretty hands-on event. And then coming out of COVID, I realized, man, having a business where I only make money once a year from an in-person event is maybe not the smartest idea. So I started something called Rhodium Remote, which essentially puts people in peer groups and helps them establish what I call a membership charter. And that's basically just helping them set up the mission, vision, and values. Why does this group exist? What do we want to get out of it? And I'll put a facilitator in place to help them run their regular meetings via Zoom, typically about an hour and a half a month. So that's become, and I use Slack for that so that each group can have their own private channel and things like that. That's become the next level of continuity, I guess, within the community where, okay, Facebooks are great, but I'm not on Facebook very often, or I can't really have a deep conversation. This gives them a whole nother way to engage regularly within the community with their peers, and makes it more scalable for me as well. So that's kind of the makeup of the current system. I'm working on a lot of other things that I think are going to be really cool in the future, but just chipping away at it.
I love it. Chris, and what you do. I want to encourage people to check out rhn.com to learn more, which is the Rhodium Network. I mean, it's super generous of you, I think, to have that group. And if you're listening now, that may change. Chris will be like, listen, I'm charging for the Facebook group now, so don't take this whenever you're listening to it, because I'm like, yeah, I mean, and we won't get into it now, but it's super generous of you. And then you could check out the events on the rhn.com. And if you're interested in any of the stuff Chris talked about, you can message them and there's an apply to join and they vet everyone. So check that out. Chris, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Everyone check out rhn.com, more episodes of the podcast, and we'll see everyone next time. Chris, thanks so much.
Thank you, Jeremy. Appreciate you having me on.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sailing right now. I'm feeling like $100 grand.